When I explain that to people here, I'm flying back to Australia because I've got a wedding or I've got a baby shower, they just cannot fathom how somebody our age it even crosses their mind as an option to have a child if you're at the beach. And, they will have no problem, someone will have no problem just putting their towel and sitting right next to you when there's a whole beach. There's a whole beach available. I'll introduce them to my Greek guy friends, and they're quite attractive women. Automatically, my guy friends are quite interested, and I have to explain to them, this one's married, this one's it's her bachelorette. They're not available, and the response is always so. The men will sit on one side of the table, they'll talk about politics, and the women will sit on the other side of the table and they'll talk about their family and food and whatnot. So I feel like there's definitely that distinction between the two genders.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today, we're diving into Greek culture, and I'm joined by Chloe, a Greek Australian who was born in Greece, moved to Australia at 18, and then decided to move back to Athens a couple of years ago. We'll be chatting about the biggest challenges she's faced trying to navigate life in Greece, the expectations versus the reality, and all the nitty-gritty you really need to know if you're thinking of moving here, beyond the postcard perfect whitewashed island fantasy we often associate with Greek life. So welcome, Chloe.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So Chloe, you were born in Greece. You moved to Australia. In what ways did you feel like Greece was calling out to you? Were you missing something in Australia? Did you feel like some of the aspects of your personality felt more Greek and maybe something Australians couldn't really relate to?
I guess I spent a lot of my younger teens in Greece. So in many ways, I feel like I was brought up here. So I grew up here, but then when I moved to Australia, I adulted in Australia. So I spent a lot of my adult years there. So my identity is probably, my sense of belonging had all been shaped in Greece. So to have that foundation suddenly ripped away from me, kind of, and placed into a completely different culture was a massive shock for me. And, Greece and Australia are two vastly different countries. It's not as if I moved from, one European country to another. I moved across continents into a place with like a different language and like a different way of speaking. There was different humor. So, I mean, the transition was tough. And honestly, I don't think I ever truly recovered from it completely. But as much as I tried, there were certain times and periods where I thought I had kind of adjusted and settled in, but it was, I think, maybe like a coping mechanism, as we all do. But I guess deep down, my heart was always looking for a way back, and whether that was through romantic relationships or like friendships that I still had left behind, or just chasing the feeling of home. There was always something that was pulling me towards Greece. And it's not just the laid back lifestyle and the sense of community. It was more like, Greece was more affordable back then as well, must I mention. So it was always a great time having that transition. But, beyond all of that, I think that I longed for that nostalgia and like the feeling of being in the place where I guess I had already internally established was my home and my safe space.
It's interesting that Greeks have a word for it. They have melancholia, right? Which is basically what you're experiencing.
That's true.
And the Brazilian Portuguese, they call it saudade, which is, I can relate to that because I moved to Canada when I was 12. And it's not that I wanted to go back to Russia. I mean, who really wants to go back to Russia these days? But I longed to be somewhere that reminded me of home, which was Europe. Right? The parks, the gardens, the fountains, the air, the way the air smells. I was going to say
the atmosphere. There's something about the atmosphere. Even if it's a good or a bad smell, there's something about it.
Yeah. Like I miss like exhaust fume smell. Like it doesn't make any sense to a foreigner, right? It's like, why would you? But it's just, it felt like something like home, something that I don't get in Canada. Like things don't smell the same in Canada. And so like when I go back to Europe, a lot of the places really remind me of home. Like if I go to Hungary, if I go to, parts of Europe. And so I get that feeling like, oof, I feel like it's authentic here. And I don't feel that sense of authenticity in Canada. And I can imagine that Australia is quite similar to Canada in many ways. I mean, did you experience that as well?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I felt like the culture shock was significant. Like the difference was massive. It wasn't as if, I was going to Italy or I was moving somewhere where the mentality is the same, the time zone is the same, or like even the weather is completely different. I was going to a Christmas in the cold, like a white Christmas, to then going to a Christmas on the beach. It was just like everything was really flipped. So yeah, I guess anything close to home, the sense of anything closest to the smell of Europe, like you said, it was that nostalgia inside me. I wasn't even able to be breadcrumbed in Australia with little bits, of home. So yeah, especially where I am from in Australia, there's not many Greeks. There's many Greek communities in other places, but the town that I was in West Australia was, yeah, not very many.
What is the town name?
Perth, West
Perth.
Australia.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Very well known. Okay. So you had moved to Australia when you were 18. And so you're obviously very, very Greek. By the people, that are listening to the podcast, they're not going to really understand that because you sound very Australian, but you're very much Greek. I know this because I moved at 12 and I'm still very much Russian in many ways, but 18 is an age where you're matured, right? And so you did all your growing up in Greece. When you were in Australia and you'd mentioned there weren't a lot of Greek people in your area, were there things where, I mean, did you feel like an outsider in many ways? Did you feel like I am too Greek? There are no Greeks around?
Yeah, look, to be honest, initially I felt very alienated, and that's because I wasn't very in touch with my Australian side. So the initial stages, the first couple of years, yes, I did feel that. I'm quite an adaptive person. I'd like to think that. So after that, I feel like I did kind of adapt quite well, and I've got some great friends over there, and um, I did actually. I studied there. I studied interior design there, and I ended up building a career there. So I did adapt, which was good. And when I did adapt, a lot of people would never have known my history. They would have never have known that I was, fresh off the boat, as they used to call me at some point. But yeah, I think it was quite a lonely feeling, knowing internally that I never felt quite at home, but it wasn't actually recognized as well, because you can't really tell. So yeah, I feel like it was quite profound.
And so what prompted you to then move back to Athens? Was it just that longing to feel at home?
Um, what prompted me? So I feel like I spent a lot of my summers coming back and spending European summer here. So that was something that would make me, it would set me back in many ways, because I'd have to go back home, and then it was like post summer blues, and it was a very unstable lifestyle having to go back and forth. So when I think I was able to get the freedom to work remotely, I think that was the pivotal point when I thought. When I also turned 30 and I had a bit of a crisis. So I thought, that's a big thing. So after my 30th birthday, I kind of packed up and I thought, let me just give it a go. And yeah, I'm still giving it a go.
So your expectations were very much marked by the fact that you would spend your summers in Greece. And I'm assuming, summer in Greece is just very ideal, slow pace of life. People really are enjoying themselves. So you had that expectation, I assume, I'm just thinking, moving to Greece. How did your experience so far live up to that?
To be fair, I didn't exactly have that expectation. I was quite aware of what I was getting myself into. I wasn't aware of, the extent of difficulty I would probably face. But I guess maybe the answer to your question is, how maybe do I explain to people that haven't really lived here what it is actually like, and it's not just sipping cocktails by the pool, as my mother would say. Are you done trolley? She goes, are you done trolleying around, on the islands? It's not like that. I have friends visit from Australia, and they're quite shocked at, especially in Athens, at a lot of different things, especially if they have to do with bureaucracy, or if they've got to stick to a certain schedule. They've got a tight schedule and they can't fit everything in. It's like, it's really hard to adapt to that way of living. And I think for me, I was semi prepared for that, but for other people who haven't been here, it's quite a challenge, and it's difficult to ease into that mentality and that lifestyle.
Yeah, and you live in Athens now, right? And is that where you lived before you moved to Australia?
Yeah, I actually am living in the same house that I grew up in. So yeah, yeah. So exactly the same neighborhood, the same neighbors, the same house, the same everything. Yeah.
Let's start with the struggles. You'd mentioned that you and a lot of your expat friends had struggled trying to get used to this life in Greece. What are the common struggles that people usually face?
I guess the first thing is probably the lack of organization, bureaucracy, like I mentioned. I think that when you're coming from a well-structured country, for example, like the US or Australia, the Greek bureaucracy will feel like a never-ending nightmare. Like it will be really hard to adjust to that. Um, a lot of things aren't digitalized. We're used to doing applications online and not having to wait. And whereas over here in Greece, you have to make appointments to see certain people at specific locations. And, you might actually not be at the right location. You might need a stamp. It's very, you have to be very, very patient. And on top of that, there's things like rules that can get randomly changed, depend on what employee you speak to. So it could be two completely different points of view for the exact same process from two different employees. So anyway, it's just like you have to be really patient for every curveball that comes your way for simple things that I guess we would be used to doing very quickly. So a lot of expats in the initial stages of settling in really struggle with that. Like it is quite challenging, especially if you don't speak the language. Luckily, I speak the language, so I can somewhat maneuver my way through. If you don't speak the language, I've heard, so many stories where it's quite crashing. But it's just a work in progress. You have to just be patient with yourself. Another thing I was probably thinking about is that it's very similar, but it's the concept of having no sense of urgency or no rush for anything. The sticking to a time, whether you're like, if someone calls you and they're like, I'm going to be there in 10 minutes, you should definitely expect no less than 30 minutes minimum of arrival time. So I guess, yeah, that is another thing that kind of goes in par with that.
For you as an Australian, how do you feel about that? Because now you're used to efficiency.
I still struggle with it quite a bit. I still struggle with it a lot. I feel like when I initially arrived, I thought I was going to recreate the system, and I was going to set the rules, and why are people here not as efficient as they can be? But then I've learned that that's just going to cause more damage to myself trying to change the system. So I'm really still trying to learn to go with the flow. And it takes time, especially for someone like me. Like I am quite structured as well with my work. I have to be super organized, and having to tone that down is a form of meditation within itself. It's something that I still struggle with, and I feel like even though you can get better and better at it, I think it's just a mindset thing where you can't bank on people being punctual.
Hey everyone, just a quick note to say that while I love putting these podcasts together each week, they do take a ton of time and effort. So if you're enjoying the show, please be sure to follow on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in, and give this podcast a 5-star rating to help it grow. This support really helps me keep improving the show's quality. Thank you, and back to the episode.
Yeah, and you can't bank on people being on time and appointments going to schedule. You just have to have a contingency amount of time in between each thing.
Yeah, if you come to this part of Europe with your Canadian or Australian or American mentality, it can be quite difficult. I know this. I lived in Portugal, and I've had situations where we didn't have internet in our house, and it took them months to fix internet, because they would come in, they would do something, it still wouldn't work. Oh, well, we didn't do it well enough. They would come back in a couple of weeks' time. And I used to get irritated, and then I had to be like, okay, I had to train myself to, you're in Portugal, there's nothing you can do. But I would get so irritated.
Mm-hmm. It's that forced meditation we were saying that you have to do. It's like when, even something just as simple as bringing a delivery to your house, they'll send you a text message in the morning and they'll be like, we'll be at your residence from in between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. It's like a whole day where you're just sitting around thinking, okay, it could be any minute now, any minute. And they, sometimes they don't even come within that time frame. So yeah, it's challenging. It's comical, really. You just have to kind of laugh about it.
Now, talking about observations that because you've made all these observations since moving to Greece in terms of, the lifestyle differences, the mentality differences. Well, let's start with the mentality differences, the way Greeks approach things. What have been the biggest culture shocks for you and for your expat friends?
The way Greeks approach things, I guess. Greeks can be friendly if they want to, but not so welcoming if they also want to. So I feel like the mentality, there's a specific mentality here that you have to learn to navigate. And that is that, they don't really accept, I guess in many cultures, they don't really accept new people with open-heartedly. You have to pass the examination, you have to pass the friendship test, which is fair enough. I guess that just because in modern days you don't really have the luxury of spending so much time with people in the initial stages, you don't really reach that point very quickly. So I guess the mentality, the thing about that is that it's really hard to make new connections if you're an expat. So I think expats stick to other expats, in most cases anyway. So I feel like that's kind of a challenge and a difference in the mentality. I can see the difference in the two cultures when it comes to things like that. I feel like Greeks tend to have a tight-knit friend group as well, and it can take a while for you to become a part of that friend group. For example, in my experience, I've often found myself being one to start conversation, or like I'll ask questions and engage with people while they kind of remain a bit polite and they don't want to be overly talkative. But that's only until they get to know you better. Once they get to know you better, it's just, they're as we say in Greek, linete glossatus, which means that their tongue gets untied. So yeah, I feel like that is different. There's definitely something. There's also a personal space issue, I would say. Like they tend to stand quite close to you. This is like something a bit more minor, but it's something that we've noticed, and it's really funny. They like to touch you during conversations, and they really have a different idea of personal boundaries compared to the Western cultures. But let's say, for example, if you're at the beach and, they will have no problem, someone will have no problem just putting their towel and sitting right next to you when there's a whole beach, there's a whole beach available. They won't have any problem with that. And then, forget about having a peaceful, isolated spot because someone will just sit right beside you within an arm's reach. So, it's funny as well, but it's like, it's a mentality thing. Like I'm trying to unravel why. Or, another demonstration of that is when, let's say, you go to an airport in all these different countries, you go to different airports and then you land in Athens airport. And it's like, I call it airport etiquette, where they love to wait for their luggage at the conveyor belt and they just all stand right in front of the conveyor belt. There's no personal space where you can sit a little bit behind, to grab your luggage. Like in any other culture, it's just like, that you're in Greece as soon as you go and grab your luggage, everyone just crowds on top. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's definitely something that we've picked up on. We do quite a bit of I do quite a bit of I wouldn't call it extreme sporting. I've recently found out that snowboarding is not an extreme sport, but we do a lot of mountain. We go to the mountains quite a bit, and there's some ski resorts and stuff. Greece is lovely because it's got beaches and mountains as well. And I think if you think a ski resort in Greece has the same sort of level of discipline as one in Austria, let's say, or Switzerland, it's entirely not true. So Greeks, they're quite bold and they take risks and they rarely take ski lessons, and they just, they'll strap in and just hope for the best. And there's no spatial awareness, and you'll just see them crashing down the mountain. It's called mountain etiquette, which they just do not have. And it's really funny because you don't see these things in other cultures as much as it's just so socially acceptable to just be chaotic on the mountain. Which again is kind of similar, but this is probably the most important one that gives me a little bit of anxiety as well. This is very similar to their driving situation, I guess. In many cultures, this has been touched on quite a bit, but I feel like traffic laws in Greece they're more of a suggestion than an actual rule. There's a lot of motorbikes here, and they'll weave through traffic and ignore red lights, and sometimes they'll drive on the sidewalk when you're trying to walk, and there's people double parked everywhere, and they're blocking any sort of street signs, but it's normal. That's just normal. I think that they drive like they've got 9 lives. It's heroic, really, but yeah, that's definitely been something that I'm still. I consider myself a confident driver, right? Like there's nothing. I drive manual. I drive on both sides of the road. Obviously, being in Australia and Greece, I can do that. But yeah, when it comes to driving to a certain destination, I feel like this also comes down to the Greeks, or I guess in the Greek mentality, when you don't really want to stick to a schedule and a time. It's because also when you're driving and you're trying to get to your destination, there's so many different things that can come in play on the road, whether that is, the gas station that you normally go to, it's just not open on the day, just for no reason. It's, they don't stick to a certain schedule, or, if you want to go grab a coffee on the way, sometimes the cafe might take 5 minutes to make the coffee. Other times it could take 20 minutes to make the coffee, and it's just, you can't predict that. So I feel like, and generally the traffic on the street, getting from A to B is always a surprise. You never know what time you're going to get there. You can try and use maps like you would anywhere else, and then even the maps can predict something, and then halfway through your drive it could double in time. So I feel like this really is the core to why Greek people don't really like to stick to a certain schedule, because you just don't actually know when you're going to get there, and you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So that's where my Australian mentality comes into play, where I think I need to constantly be sticking to a schedule, and I need to make sure that I'm meeting my deadlines and I'm, punctual with my time. So if I say I'm going to be somewhere at a certain time, God forbid, if I'm driving and something unexpected happens, I just have to learn to have that mentality of, it's going to be fine. It will be fine. You'll get there when you get there. It doesn't matter if you're 5 minutes late. Nobody's going to start without you. It's just, I think that's how they cope with that.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So in terms of the time schedule, so their countries fall into 2 categories. It's either monochronic or polychronic, and Greeks are polychronic, which means that they put, first of all, relationships first. So like if they're in conversation with someone, that's priority instead of being somewhere on time. But you raised a great point, which is that how can you really know when you're going to be somewhere when the infrastructure is not set up in a way that you can predict that, right? So then people understanding that there's a lot more lenience that happens when it comes to arriving late, and people have an understanding that, no one's actually going to be on time. Whereas in Australia and in Canada, you can get somewhere on time. You can predict when the bus is going to come, or, how long it's going to take you to realistically get to point B. And so people understand that, if you arrange something, that everyone's going to be on time. And so if you're late, the meeting is going to start without you, that kind of thing. So that's very, very interesting. And also you'd mentioned that there is no base for how someone is going to treat you. In Australia and in Canada and in the US, for example, there is a base standard for how you are expected to get treated. I don't know if Australia is the same way, but in Canada, you understand that customer service is always going to be really good, and that it doesn't matter if someone had their cup of coffee that day. That is completely irrelevant. Like the point is that they're supposed to treat you in a certain way, and that's the expectation. And if they don't, you can actually go and complain and they can get fired. But I've learned that, in Greece and in the Balkans and in a lot of parts in Europe, there is no expectation for how someone is going to treat you. If they're having a great day, they will treat you perfectly. They might pour you an extra shot of raki because they're having a wonderful day. They just had, their wife gave birth. Let's celebrate. But if they're not having a good day,
yeah, you're not going to have a good day either.
Exactly. That will strongly reflect on you and how they're going to treat you. And so you can have two versions of the same person, on different days. And so I feel like in Greece, you have to come out prepared for anything to happen. A really wonderful day or a really terrible day. You really cannot plan your days very well as well.
No. So, I think, are you talking mainly in the work culture, within the work environment?
Yeah, and I actually wanted to get into the work culture as well. But in terms of the customer service, let's talk about the fact that there's not really a customer service the way we know it in Canada or Australia or the US, obviously. Part of that is also the tipping culture is not as prevalent, but also the work culture. And let's talk about the work culture.
So, work culture in Australia, I guess I'm bringing up Australia because it's my closest, but it's quite structured, and there's very clear understanding of what the roles are. The wages are quite good. They promote work-life balance quite a bit. In Greece, it's more chaotic. You might work longer hours and get paid less. There's also a big difference between who you know and what you know. Networking is key here. But that being said, Greeks aren't obsessed with work like Australians are. Like in Australia, people tie their entire identity to their job, which is, it's fantastic. I have no issues with that. I did that for a very long time. But in Greece, people work to live, and they don't live to work, which is a very, very obvious difference. A difference that I've observed quite a bit. While both countries, you could say they value hard work. It's just their approach to, let's say, job security and hierarchy, which is another big thing, and the work-life balancing. In Australia, ideally, you would have career growth and progression. You would work in a company for 5+ years and you would have gotten a promotion, you would have gotten a pay rise and learnt new skills, and they would value you as an employee. I feel like in Greece, job security is a paradox. So on one hand, you've got two different options. So once you get a government job, you're kind of set for life, because in the public sector, employees are almost impossible to fire. And then on the other hand, in the private sector, jobs are so unstable, with companies, frequently either delaying payments and salaries, or they're shutting down because of financial struggles. And many people just take whatever job they can find, even if it's underpaid. They just value being able to have a job and an income over their career progression, or let's say their salary increase and things like that. So that was a big thing that I was discussing with a lot of friends of mine here who work for Greek companies. Obviously, salaries and payments, they're almost never on time, and they can vary different times. They never stick to a specific amount, which is like it's quite frustrating. Their hierarchy, that's something that shocked me quite a bit. So I agree. I guess in Greece, hierarchy is more rigid. In Australia, it's quite flexible. You tend to be casual with your boss. You can call him by his first name, and junior employees, they have a say, and they can speak their opinions and whatnot, and their opinion is, majority of the time, it's valued. Whereas here, employees are kind of expected to respect the authority, and challenging your boss's decision can be seen as disrespectful majority of the time. And if you approach your boss, or if you approach someone who is a bit more senior than you, and directly say, maybe I think we should have a different approach, or have some business suggestions, that could be seen as questioning the boss's authority, instead of giving input that could value the company. So Yeah, that's something that I've come across most Greek employers. I feel like it's a novelty to not have that. It's alarming as well. Um, a lot of people get these jobs because of who they know, as well as I mentioned before. It's all about networking. Doesn't matter how good you might be at your job, or the qualifications that you have. We have this word in Greek which is called meson, which means I guess it just means a way, or a visma. It's just a way to get in to a job or into a company, and that's by somebody or somebody who recommends you. So there's a lot of this internal stuff going on, and it's really hard to sort of break into an industry if you don't know somebody. Which I've found that as well. I've tried really hard being here. I'm a freelance interior designer, and I get a lot of work all over the world. And then when it comes to Greek people, they're always so hesitant, and it's always such a mission to be able to break through and get them to trust you. And is there somebody that can vouch for you? So yeah, it's really about who you know, as opposed to what you know.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Because we have this perception of Greece as a very laid back country. As you said, people work to live, and a lot of Greek people have actually written under my videos saying that we're incredibly overworked as well, because obviously the wages are very small. There is a lot of hierarchy, and so you don't have a lot of say. And I've been told that working under Greek bosses is not great. If they're not a great boss, they will really treat you not in a very pleasant way. And so, but talking about, the low wages, how do you feel like that's impacted the Greek society? Because from what I know about, statistics, people get married quite late in Greece now. I think it's one of the latest ages of marriage, I think 34, 35, which has risen quite a lot in the last few years. And so why do you think that is?
I mean, obviously, because one of the biggest challenges is the wages being so low and the cost of living just constantly going up. Many young Greeks find it difficult to become financially independent at a certain age. So I feel like average salaries in the area that I live in is a very nice area, but the average salary is, it varies from 700 to 1,200 euros per month, which is barely enough to cover any bills or any expenses. When you think that, a rental could cost you 600 to 700 euros in like an average area. So, the taxes being high as well, I feel like it's just getting harder and harder for people to be able to have that independency. So consequentially, then having children and getting married takes us the backseat, because initially, in older generations, people would actually get married and have kids quite young. And now that the financial struggle is so big, and since the crisis hit, everyone's main focus is in survival mode of how they're going to actually be financially stable and secure. And to add the burden of maybe a family or getting married, which is another expense, is something that is now tabooed, because how are you going to be able to financially cope with a decision like this when you can barely support yourself and move out of home? It's a discussion that I have with many people that either are expats here or are in relationships here, because the decision of having a child is something that in other cultures, let's say for example in Australia, my friends, some of them are much younger than me, and they're onto their second child, and it's not even a thought where everything is planned and that's what they want, and it's an easy thing. And then when I explain that to people here, I'm flying back to Australia because I've got a wedding or I've got a baby shower, they just cannot fathom how somebody our age it even crosses their mind as an option to have a child in this day and age. So yeah, that topic is very hot.
Yeah.
It's a very hot topic.
It's so interesting too, because when you think of Greece, you think, well, Greek people are definitely going to have babies before Australians, because obviously it's such a family focused culture and family is everything. And, Greeks used to have big families. And so those statistics are changing really rapidly. As you said, there's no security in life. They can't afford it. What also happens, I heard, is that a lot of men live with their parents for a very long time. And so, the whole mama's boy phenomenon in Greece, which we can talk about based on your observations. But if you live with your mom up until a certain age, let's say you live with your mom until 35 as a man, probably the last thing you want to do is now get married. And, now maybe you want some freedom after that, or maybe you're used to living with your mom and you have it great. Like your mom cooks for you and you can have a relationship on the side, but there's no urgency to get married or take it to the next step. What do you think about this? What is your experience been like with Greek men?
Look, to be honest, my experience with Greek men, I feel like you attract what you put out there. So in no means have I ever attracted a Greek man that is a mama's boy, because it wouldn't really last. But I see them; they're my friends. My friends are mama's boys, and my friends' husbands or partners are mama's boys. And look, it is a thing, but it's not a thing for them, because they do not understand the concept of being a mama's boy. They think, which is true, their family's quite tight knit, and parents are also quite clingy. They won't let go of the kids easily. My parents were kicking me out of the house when I was 18, telling me to move out. Whereas my Australian mum, I guess, not my Greek dad, he's very traditional. But if you were like Greek parents, it's how are you going to keep the child closer to you for longer? So if majority of the parents are like that here, then you don't really have the mama's boy syndrome unless you are an outsider who observes this. I've had experiences with friends of mine who are now 28 or 30, still living at home, which is fine, but there's a border between living at home and also having your parents shop for you, using their car, expecting them to do your laundry or cook meals for you. I think it's a common thing that happens here, but I must say it is getting better. It is changing quite a bit. I think the younger generation is a little bit more excited to travel, so that takes priority. And because having kids and having a family is something that's taken the back seat, I feel like there's new opportunities, like maybe studying abroad if you can afford it, or going on vacation with friends and traveling and going outside of Greece, which is or doing a summer season on one of the Greek islands, which is something that the younger generation do as a seasonal job. They'll leave their hometown and they'll go to the islands where all the tourists are, and there's all hospitality venues. They get a hospitality job and they stay there for, let's say, the entire summer, which could be 3 or 4 months, and then they get that fever of living out of home. And it's slowly starting to change, is what my observations are. But yeah, it is very much so a society where you stay at home as long as possible and pay the minimum amount as long as possible. I mean, most people don't even contribute to bills or rent. They contribute in other ways, but paying rent is not a thing. Whereas in Australia, we had a weekly, we had to pay board. We had to pay a weekly amount to cover, the bills and the food and whatever it was. And whether if we were unemployed or not, sometimes that could change. We could be a bit flexible. If we didn't have a job, it would be a bit less. But yeah, it was like an incentive to get us out.
Yeah, but you raise a really great point, is that whatever I call mama's boys, it's just the way that society is built, because families are so tight knit. And so there's no taboo about being close to your family, which I think is also beautiful in many ways, because you take care of them, they take care of you, or you take care of them. Sorry, it starts with them taking care of you. And then when they get older, they can count on you to take care of them. And so, of course, in countries like the US, you move out as in Australia at 18 years old, but also it's a very individualistic country where you maybe see your family once a year for Christmas at times, because people live all over the country. And so I can imagine Australia is very similar to that. Whereas in Greece, it's like there's a positive with being very close to your family. And so there's nothing I mean, it can show up in negative ways in the fact that the man, maybe when he's dating you, he doesn't know how to do anything. He doesn't know how to do his own laundry, doesn't know how to cook. He expects you to do that for him, which is the negative effect of this mama's boy syndrome.
Definitely. I feel like Greek Greek family, the dynamic is quite weird in a Greek family. It's always like the girls, we have to baby the girls, and the men, there's quite a male dominant sort of society still. So when you're having family gatherings, you all sit around the table, and even the discussions that you're having, it's sort of like seclusive with women and men. So the men will sit on one side of the table, they'll talk about politics, and the women will sit on the other side of the table, and they'll talk about the family and food and whatnot. So I feel like there's definitely that distinction between the two genders, which means that even the whole mama's boy now is also becoming mama's girl. So it's not just the guys, it's also the girls. But I guess in our society, there is no such thing as a mama's girl, because it's fine if a girl stays a little bit longer. It's fine if a girl wants to hang out a little bit more. It's just the males that get all this criticism because they're still at home when they should be out there, being providers and living their life and building their life.
And let's talk about the gender dynamics then, in terms of, whether it's gender roles or anything that you've noticed when it comes to men to women relationships in Greece.
Yeah.
Please be honest. Tell us like it is.
So I guess there's a lot of differences between the two cultures in regards to, let's say, the male to female dynamic. The man here is still expected to be the provider. And that is that's a burden that he carries, but the woman also has the expectation that he should meet that criteria. So there's definitely a big gap in between men and I guess in more independent women who can seek for themselves and whatnot. So there's definitely that difference in the two genders. I feel like flirting is also a little bit different. I feel like Australian men kind of just take rejection really well and just jump off to the next, whereas Greek men can be quite persistent, and they're not afraid to approach a woman multiple times even if she does reject them, and compliments are quite extravagant. So I feel like within that there's also a mentality of I will wear you down. It doesn't matter if you're going to reject me. I will not respect your decision, and I will wear you down. Which, again, it's a little bit of an imbalance in the two genders. There's a lot of. I would say, I want to touch on the subject of infidelity a little bit. So, I want to talk about my personal experience, I guess, being half Australian, and then I want to talk about what I'm seeing around me. So loyalty, I guess, is quite highly valued in relationships within the Australian culture. So infidelity is considered a serious betrayal, as it should be, I guess, in most cultures. But it's very uncommon and completely frowned upon for it to happen. Like most Australians, including my friends, they hold really strong opinions about staying faithful, and I share the same belief. And if someone were to cheat, it would be seen as like a complete deal breaker in a relationship. It's infidelity just doesn't have a place in the general mindset of an Australian relationship, and that's me being completely honest. And then coming here, what I've realized is that infidelity is more common, and it seems to be somewhat more easily accepted and overlooked. And there's often a sense of a suspicion between partners, with both parties questioning each other's loyalty. And this can lead to so many jealous behaviors and some borderline psychotic actions in some cases. But, it's not unusual for Greek partners to suspect each other for cheating. And it's something that feels like it's almost expected as a part of a relationship dynamic, which, in many Greek couples might even stay together despite infidelity, just viewing it as a part of life.
Yeah, sorry. As you were talking, and I had to look up this article because one of my subscribers sent me an article saying that actually the Anglo cultures are the ones, even though cheating does happen, they tend to be the most, they tend to express the most regret about it. And actually, cheating is not okay in all of the Anglo cultures, like the US, Canada, Australia. We see it as something that is negative. Whereas in Europe and a lot of countries like Italy, people don't regret it as much, which is something very, very interesting, right? It's almost seen like a part of life, which is it is something you cannot control. It's just, we're human. This is what happens, which is something that you were talking about when it comes to Greek people and could be the reason that people stay together after infidelity as well.
Yeah, I see that. I have live examples of how this happens constantly with the different cultures. I'll have friends of mine visit from Australia. They'll visit me in Athens and, let's say that half of them are married or it's a bachelorette party and, they're quite clearly not available. And I'll introduce them to my Greek guy friends and, they're quite attractive women. So, automatically my guy friends are quite interested and I have to explain to them, this one's married, this one's, it's her bachelorette, they're not available. And the response is always, so? So? And I think to myself how different it must be to assume that someone would be down to hook up, even if they are in a committed relationship. Whereas if that's not an indication of how unavailable you are.
That in Australia, I can imagine that wouldn't be the case at all because people respect relationships.
Absolutely not. If you're reaching the point of being, committed to someone where you would propose to them and get married, that's the end. That's you forever. Like that, they respect that so much.
That's very interesting. And so do you find that Greek men cheat more on average? Have you looked at the statistics or any stories?
I don't think I've met a Greek man who has not admitted to cheating. Maybe one or two, but I feel like it's a part of their upbringing in their families or like even their teens. When you're in a younger relationship, it's like a thing where you just have to have the thrill of cheating, and then after that, it becomes like, oh, I've done it once, so it mustn't be too bad. I've even been in a relationship where, I was with a partner and during a heated argument, in order for him to show me how much he really liked me, he expressed himself by saying, you're the only girl that I've never thought to cheat on. And I thought, yeah, so it's like, there's such a gap because for me, that was something that, you should not even be proud of admitting to, but for him and I guess for a majority of the Greek society who do practice infidelity, it's something that it's uncommon to not cheat on somebody, so you should take it as a compliment.
Is it because Greeks follow their heart and are very passionate? Or is it just that it's excused in society and it's kind of, well, so and so did it, Yasos cheated on his girlfriend, that means that's okay?
I think it's just so spoken of. Like you just hear it about everyone. No one. It's very rare to hear that people are loyal to each other. So when you hear that everyone is doing a certain thing, it almost becomes like a trend and something that's easily forgiven because it's so hard to find someone that hasn't done this thing. So, I think that's what it is.
Cheating is such an interesting thing because yes, we all do it to an extent, right? That I wouldn't say there's a country where people don't cheat. But if you watch, let's say an American movie and there's cheating that's happening, you will notice that there's a pattern where it's obviously letting people know that it's not okay because in every movie that happens, the couple breaks up or they have they have a fallout. It's never seen as just okay. Whereas I'm not saying that European movies show it as okay, but I feel like it's more accepted as a part of a relationship, seeing as that we're not really monogamous and that it's just normal that the man strays. Being from Russia, it's kind of accepted that the man strays because he's unable to be with just one partner. And so women accept that. Women accept that and they forgive it because they realize that there's no way they're going to find a partner who's not going to do that. So it is very interesting how that's seen in the fabric of the society in Greece that well, it's just a thing that men do. And how they express it so openly, like, you're the first partner I've never really thought of cheating on. Whereas if someone says that to you in Australia or in Canada, that's a very
Yeah.
strange thing to say.
I know you have to be able to give them grace though, because they just don't know any different. Like you watch any Greek soap opera and there's cheating after scandal after cheating scandal. You know, it's just like the drama just revolves around the cheating scandals in the soap operas. Whereas, you know, very rarely would you see an American or an Australian soap opera where the cheating is the main focus. Maybe it's like a murder, you know, or something else. The cheating is just not the main focus of the plot.
And I would go so far as to say that I don't really know so many Australian or American soap operas in general. So it's the culture of being brought up on soap operas that might make this behavior even more prevalent. You know, we have Turkish soap operas, Mexican soap operas, countries where people actually cheat quite a lot, and where people are very possessive as well. And I've also heard that Greeks tend to be quite jealous, which now, given this fact, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, everything kind of comes down to something. So I feel like every behavioral issue, I wouldn't say issue or tendency, all it intertwines with each other. So, you know, the reason why so many Greek women, Greek men as well, but profoundly women are so jealous and so vocal about how jealous they are, you know, they're so possessive, is because there's this expectation that someone is going to cheat. So you lay the foundation and you announce that you are a jealous person and that there's going to be repercussions, and, you know, don't mess with me, and this is how I'm expressing my jealousy, because it is expected that once things go a little bit south, that infidelity is going to be the first solution or the first option for them.
Out of your expat friends that are in relationships with Greeks, are there any patterns that you guys talked about in terms of, oh, this seems to come up time and time again?
I think it's basically all the things that we've kind of touched on, the being the mama's boy. So being a mama's boy and then, you know, letting a new woman into your life with the expectation that she's going to replace, and if not, you know, exceed the expectations of your mother is a big thing. So, you know, you've got to cook just as well, if not better than her. You've got to have the same cleaning style. You've got to iron the shirts the same way. So it's this mentality of like, I'm going to come in, and you're going to come in and you're going to have to meet this criteria, and this is where the bar is, and you have to meet that. Otherwise, you know, what are you worthy of? I mean, I'm dramatizing it a little bit, but that's I see that quite a bit, where the mother and the family are generally quite involved in the relationship. And another reason why I think they are involved is because, as we were saying before, you know, it's really hard to move out of home. You could have these relationships while you're still at home. And if you do have the luxury of moving out of home, usually it's either into the house next door or into the extension of the backyard. And, you know, it's not too far. So the family is really, really directly involved in the relationship, and they're not afraid to share their opinions. So I feel like that's definitely a pattern that I see quite a bit, you know, with keeping your family close and getting their opinion on lots of different things that are personal matters. Another pattern would probably be, I guess, the financial side. So because a guy is expected to provide, and he does feel a bit demasculated if he's not, it's almost like the dynamic is you are expecting to move out of home with this guy. He's going to have to cover the expenses for the move out. You are, you know, your criteria is you're going to have to be able to like cook and clean the same way his mother does. And he has to meet the criteria of being able to provide. So I feel like that dynamic shift is quite different, especially for quite independent and self-sufficient women. That doesn't really work. Another thing I would probably say, oh, you got me on the spot now, really. I'm trying to think of any other traits. We don't really have that many people in the group that are dating these style men. We do have stories. Yeah, I can't think of anything else now.
Well, for you personally, you seem like a very independent woman. Obviously, you work for yourself, you have a career, you're also Australian, so you come in with those values to Greece. And so have you struggled when it comes to finding dating in Greece, maybe meeting someone who's not intimidated by that at all? Or even have you just kind of resigned to the fact that maybe you're just going to date a foreigner in Greece or someone very international, someone maybe a little bit more open-minded?
To be fair, I think it's a novelty to find somebody in Greece to meet the criteria. It's going to be it's tough. So I did spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether I sort of change my perspective on things and try and compromise in order to be able to be accepted a little bit more. And then you go into like a resentment cycle where you resent the other person for changing the way you are or making you change certain habits. So to be fair, it is a struggle. It is something really difficult, and it's something really hard to come across unless you're willing to change certain aspects of your personality. A lot of my really close girlfriends who, also are in the same situation as me, they find that it's impossible to find a guy who, isn't a mama's boy, doesn't have certain opinions and their values are aligned, speaks English enough, who would want to travel, who is ambitious enough, who can think outside the box, who, lives out of home and is a little bit independent. So to meet all this criteria, I think a lot of people are just starting to travel a little bit more. Or to be fair, there are quite a few expats that come. And there is sort of a lot of different expat meetups, but again, it's so tough to find somebody that meets that criteria within a society that is so tunnel visioned in certain ways. So yeah, it is a struggle.
What have been some of your favorite things about living in Greece?
Some of my favorite things about living in Greece, I guess, there's a list of a lot of things. So the reason I wanted to kind of establish myself here and be around the culture is because there's always something to do. I am in the arts, so there's so many arts, and there's so many music events, and there's so many different options. There's a lot of creative people in Athens, which I love. And if there's not many creative people in Athens, Italy, Spain is a flight away. So that has been something that's really kept me here, and I love that about being in this part of the world. I also feel that Greece has taught me to slow down. I'm still learning it, but it's a work in progress, but it really is a really good opportunity because, the complexities of living in Australia is you are constantly chasing your tail. You have to stick to a schedule. If you want to see friends, you have to plan it in advance. You have to stay fit and active. Australia is a sport obsessed culture, so you have to keep up. You have to be active. If you want to catch up with a friend, sometimes you have to go do a sporting activity or walk, which is great. But you constantly are in fight or flight mode. So because I'm quite a competitive person, when I was around that, I also was doing that. I was practicing that. I wanted to keep up with my fitness. I wanted to drink enough water. I wanted to get successful enough. I wanted to look good. I wanted to be able to keep up with everything. And the reality is that you just cannot do that. And not only can you not do that, it also, you feel like time is slipping away from you when you're trying to tick all these boxes. So for me, being here in a society where none of that really matters, it's very much go with the flow. It's very much live for the now. And it's very much, it will come. It will come at its own pace, and chasing something is not going to get you anywhere, but that's socially acceptable here. It's fine. Like nobody's going to judge you for that. Nobody's going to judge you for taking your time to do certain things. So I think that feeling is something that I really value about being here.
You've raised such a wonderful point, and that, I'm starting to see these patterns in the world where, if you're talking to anybody from the Anglo cultures again, Australia, the US being such a prime example of that. I was just in the US. And so the one thing that seemed to come up time and time again is exactly what you just said, is that productivity, it's optimization, it's efficiency. It's all those things that make Australia, for example, such a wonderful country to work with. If I have brand partnerships, I would choose Australia and the US any day because they get shit done. They do things well. If you emailed someone, you'll get a response the very next day.
You will.
If they're sick, they'll still email you back, right? So there's wonderful things about the working culture in those countries. And that's why they're doing so well, is that people really are, as you said, even sporting is a thing. I mean, like you still, if you're going out, you're going to go out and you're going to work out. It's not about, it's even optimization in your workout schedule. You're going to go to the gym, you're going to go hiking, you're going to book that thing. But what gets lost for me in that chasing of the tail, as you said, is that we lose a lot of the, authenticity. We lose a lot of the connection, a lot of the social life. We lose the focus on the now. We stop living in the moment. We need to now do mindfulness exercises just to be present. And Greek society, Spanish society, Italian society, while they severely lack, especially I would say Italy and Greece, Spain maybe less so, but they lack the focus and the optimization and the productivity to the extent that Australians and Americans have been nailed. But they've kind of optimized the social life, right? So they know that life isn't just about running after that next big thing. It's about really enjoying the process.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like that's why a lot of us are moving to these countries. Like I'm thinking of going to Spain now to spend a few months just because of this, because I'm missing the social life, because I'm tired of just working. I want to also work, close my laptop and go do things, which is what I did when I lived in Portugal. I enjoyed the moment more.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's we're in such a privileged position to be able to have the best of both worlds, and it's something that I never take for granted. I feel like here people live for the moment, and there's less stress about obviously the career ambitions and being focused, as you said, and is more enjoying life, and that's something that I admire. People make time for friends, and meals are long and they're enjoyed, and you can go on a random coffee date with someone and that could turn into an entire day of you guys running errands together, or like if you have lunch, it could progress, but that at the same time I feel like there's a bit of a resigned mentality where people feel like things will never change, so they just kind of accept the inefficiencies, and there's a beauty to that too.
And there's a resigned mentality when it comes to achieving big things as well. Like in the US and Canada, I think to an extent in Australia, maybe less so, you have the tall poppy syndrome still. But you have this sense of the sky is the limit. You still can achieve whatever you set your mind to. And I think in a lot of parts of Europe, people are like, it's not going to happen. Just enjoy now, because whatever you're thinking of, whatever your big picture is, the chances that's not going to happen. So don't even chase that.
Yeah, but don't you feel like sometimes in life that is actually quite a good way to think? Because at the end of the day, when we do have all these dreams and ambitions, and it's great and it's amazing, and I have heaps of them, but they just change as you progress. Your goals change so quickly. Like maybe something, we had a pandemic and that stopped so many people from doing things. Like you just never know what life can throw you. And I feel like if you're not enjoying the moment now, then you'll never be able to face the challenge when it comes. You can prepare for anything, but you just don't know what is going to come your way.
Yeah, I think it's both. So for me, I love progressing towards something. I love working on something. If I'm just living in the moment and I don't have a goal in mind, that's also going to get boring. It's like when you go on vacation and you're on the beach for 2 weeks in a row, you're like,
yeah, of course.
Now what? At the same time, hyper focusing on your work and really striving for that next big thing. It's waiting until you have the thing to be happy, and it's waiting, and then it's the new thing, and then it's the new thing, and then it's never ending, right? It's like you're always prolonging your happiness, which is also a negative thing.
It definitely, but I feel like a lot of the I guess Australian culture, they do promote that in a very young age, that you kind of have to do that. The education system is completely different. So like in Greek, the Greek education system is so old fashioned that it forces you to stay in the past anyway and not really have these ambitions. Like, I mean, I don't think the curriculum has changed in Greece since the 90s. I remember when I was going through primary school and my dad was studying and we were doing homework together, he knew majority of the chapters off by heart because it was probably the same book. They just rebranded the cover that many years later. So it's very rigid and theory based. So a lot of people don't actually have that space for personal growth or development, and they don't get challenged, and they don't actually have that exposure to the feeling of gratification when you do those things and achievement.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to both. At the same time, I do agree with the fact that living in the now is the only thing we have for certain. Like, we don't know what's going to happen the next day. And I think our societies really promote growth and efficiency to the point where we're so disconnected from our reality. And we need to, as I said, we need to do mindfulness exercises just to ground ourselves. Whereas societies like the Greek society, and maybe we have a little bit of the rosy picture because obviously you work remote, you're not working in a Greek company. So you have the best of both worlds, like still the Australian salary and the Greek way of life, which I think a lot of people might say in the comments, well, how great, right? But at the same time, I think the positive is that, talking about the late night culture and talking about just sitting in the moment and having a drink with someone and not knowing what's going to happen that day, instead of, rushing home to do your next big thing, which is such a big thing in Canada, making plans with someone is a whole ordeal. And when they do show up, people are in a rush to get back home to do something. I don't really know what it is, but no one seems to be enjoying the moment anymore, especially since the pandemic. I feel like it's gotten worse. And so I think a lot of us are really craving this connection, this feeling of just this authenticity, right? I feel like a lot of us are not, we don't have that in our lives.
Yeah, I feel Greeks do tend to have that in certain aspects. I feel majority of it. They have an incredibly social life, which means that they're exposed to all these different kinds of people every day of the week that, is a non-work environment. They love going out and spending hours at, coffee shops and having deep conversations. But, when it comes to adopting new ideas or changing their lifestyle, they can be quite resistant. So they're skeptical of new trends, and many older Greeks are actually suspicious of modern concepts, like, as you said, working remotely and digital banking, and even mental health awareness. That's something that still hasn't really, it's only started to kick off now in recent years. But I think Greeks are quite stubborn in the way that they don't like really being told what to do. And if a rule is imposed, they're sort of more likely to ignore it or find a way around it rather than actually adapt to it. And it's a really good example that you brought up. COVID is, we had a lockdown in Australia. There was a lockdown in Greece, and in Australia everybody stuck to the rules, and isolation was done pretty quickly, whereas in Greece everyone was secretly gathering at houses or finding loopholes in order to avoid restrictions. So yeah, there is a lot of don't tell me what to do mentality here.
And I think a lot of it goes for Southern Europe as well. I spent my COVID in Portugal, and I remember they had very, very strict lockdowns. And then at one point, everybody was just in the bar and people were smoking in a bar. And I said, we're still in the midst of COVID. And they said, oh, it's okay. And I thought to myself, this would never, first of all, smoking indoors.
Yeah,
let's
not touch on that.
We haven't even talked about the smoking, but just the as you said, adherence to rules is a real conversation when it comes to Greece. And so I wonder how people can relax in such a stressful society where nothing runs according to plan. Do they just go, you know what? Nothing is going according to plan. Let me just relax because there's not much I can do about it.
That's exactly right. There we have this saying, Kane pomoni, which just means be patient and everything will happen. So one of the biggest differences in their mentalities is how Greeks, they just accept the problems rather than actively trying to fix them. They love to complain. First of all, they love to complain. We love to complain. I love to complain myself. But so there's a difference between complaining and then actively doing something about what you're complaining. And then there's also people who accept problems and actively complain and don't actively try to fix them. So Greeks are used to the bureaucracy and the corruption and the inefficiencies that we were talking about, but instead of fighting it and instead of doing something about it, most people just sit back and they accept it, and they just go that that's just the way things are. That's just the way things are. TIG, as we say, this is Greece. There's no trust in the system, so many Greeks believe that the government is corrupt, which, it can be. And so they don't even bother trying to change things. It's like law enforcement, for example. They don't have a great relationship with law enforcement, or complaining is definitely a national sport, and they'll spend hours discussing problems over those coffees that we all go for, but there's no actual solutions. So at the end of the day, the conclusion is just let it be, and whatever happens, be patient.
Chloe, going forward, do you see yourself staying in Greece or going back to Australia?
I would 100% hand on heart say that I would want to stay in Greece. I think that when we were talking about those little hacks that people try and find, I think I found my own hack. So I really appreciate that it's difficult living here. It's a struggle. And as much as this whole time, you and I have been talking, and majority I've just been noting all the interesting things about Greek people and Greek mentality. I feel like there's such a beauty about being able to have that freedom and being able to also have the two separate cultures and have that connection to your roots, but also have that external as well. I feel like if I can keep that going, and if I can, even master more hacks of living here, then that would be my preference, and that's what I'm aiming towards.
Chloe, thank you so much for taking part in the podcast. Guys, please.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Guys, let us know what you thought about the podcast. Obviously, we've tried to be as honest as possible about Chloe's experiences. Yours might be different, so if so, let us know below. And Chloe, where can people check you out?
So my Instagram is XLOH_. I also have a interior design business, which is called This is Project D. It's all in my bio. And I also have a international furniture brand, which is called The Drop. And you can find all of that in my Instagram bio.
Perfect. I'm going to link all those socials below in your website as well, so people can come say hi, check you out. Maybe they need interior designing, whatever the case may be. Chloe, once again, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Bye. Hope you all enjoyed the podcast. If you made it all the way through, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're watching or listening. Your support helps me bring in bigger guests and surprise you with even better episodes. Until next time.